My ex-husband hired private investigators to expose me, claiming my company was fake. He planned to humiliate me in front of everyone at our daughter's birthday party. When they walked in, he looked triumphant. Then they said, "Sir, you're under arrest." What they'd actually discovered would make your jaw drop. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how I went from being the delusional ex-wife with her little hobby business to watching David Mitchell get handcuffed in my daughter's backyard while 50 guests stared in shock. Because honey, sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted in the most spectacular way possible. 3 weeks earlier, I was standing in my kitchen in suburban Chicago, stirring my morning coffee and checking emails on my phone. At 52, I'd learned to treasure these quiet moments before the day exploded into chaos. My company, Digital Solutions Consulting, was doing better than ever, though you'd never know it from my modest 2-bedroom rental house. The doorbell rang, interrupting my peaceful morning routine. Through the peephole, I saw 2 people in cheap suits standing on my porch like missionaries ready to save my soul. The woman looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, and the man kept checking his watch. "Patricia Mitchell?" the woman asked when I opened the door. "That's me. Though if you're selling something, I should warn you, I'm not in a buying mood this early." She flashed a badge so quickly I barely caught it. "I'm Detective Sharon Walsh. This is Detective Marcus Brown. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your business practices." Now, most people would panic at this point, but I'd spent 2 years building my company from nothing after David left me for his 26-year-old dental hygienist. I'd learned to keep my poker face, even when my world was crumbling. "Business practices?" I stepped aside to let them in, noting how they both scanned my living room like they were cataloging evidence. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "We're good, thanks." Detective Walsh settled onto my second-hand couch while Detective Brown remained standing, probably trying to intimidate me with his height. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've received some concerning reports about Digital Solutions Consulting." I sat across from them, cradling my coffee mug. "Concerning how?" Last I checked, helping small businesses optimize their online presence wasn't exactly a federal crime. "The reports suggest you might be operating a fraudulent business, taking money from clients without delivering services." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I took a slow sip of coffee and watched Detective Brown shift uncomfortably. "Who exactly made these reports?" "We're not at liberty to say, but the complainant provided detailed information about your company's alleged activities." Alleged activities. I set my mug down and leaned back. "Let me guess. Someone told you I was running some kind of scam out of my home office, taking advantage of poor, unsuspecting business owners?" Detective Walsh's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Doubt, maybe, or recognition that this wasn't going the way someone had promised it would. "We'd like to examine your business records," Detective Brown interjected. "Do you have a warrant?" "We were hoping for your cooperation." I smiled. Not my friendly smile, but the one I'd perfected during 2 years of divorce proceedings with David's expensive lawyers. "I'm always happy to cooperate with law enforcement, but I'm also not stupid. If you want to see my business records, come back with a warrant." They exchanged glances, clearly not expecting resistance from what someone had probably described as a desperate divorcee playing at being a businesswoman. "Mrs. Mitchell," Detective Walsh tried again, "if you're running a legitimate business, you have nothing to hide." "You're absolutely right. I have nothing to hide. But I also have rights, and I'm not waiving them just because someone with a grudge decided to waste police resources." That's when I saw it. The slight nod Detective Brown gave Detective Walsh, the way they both relaxed just a fraction. They weren't here because they believed I was a criminal. They were here because someone had convinced them to investigate, and now they were starting to realize they'd been played. After they left, I stood at my window, watching their car disappear down the street. Someone wanted to destroy my business badly enough to file false police reports. Someone who knew enough about my life to make the allegations sound plausible. Someone who still thought I was the same broken woman who'd signed those divorce papers 2 years ago. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't called in months. "Jennifer? It's Mom. About Emma's birthday party this weekend. I think it's time we had a little family gathering." The conversation with my daughter went exactly as I'd expected. Jennifer had inherited her father's talent for making reasonable requests sound like personal attack. "Mom, I really wish you'd reconsider the guest list," she said, her voice carrying that careful tone she'd developed since the divorce. "Dad's bringing Amber, and you know how uncomfortable that makes everyone." I was sitting in my office, which used to be the dining room before David decided he deserved the house, and I deserved whatever scraps I could gather. 3 computer monitors displayed client dashboards, project timelines, and profit margins that would have shocked my ex-husband into an early grave. "Uncomfortable for who exactly?" I asked, minimizing a spreadsheet that showed this month's revenue at $43,000. "Your father's the one who chose to bring his girlfriend to his daughter's birthday party." "She's not his girlfriend anymore." "Mom, they're engaged." The words hit hit like a slap, but I'd had 2 years to practice not flinching. Congratulations to them. I'll be sure to send a card, Jennifer sighed, and I could picture her rubbing her temples the way she'd done since childhood when life got complicated. Look, Dad's been saying some things about your business. He's worried you're getting taken advantage of. Worried about me? How touching. What exactly has he been saying? He thinks someone's scamming you, that your company isn't real, and you're just throwing away the settlement money on some online scheme. I leaned back in my chair, watching a notification pop up on my screen. Another client requesting a proposal for a 6-figure digital transformation project. And what do you think, Jennifer? I think you're my mother, and I love you, and I want you to be careful. The diplomatic answer, the safe answer, the answer that avoided taking sides while gently suggesting I might indeed be the gullible divorcee her father portrayed me as. I appreciate your concern, sweetheart. I'll see you Saturday at 2. After hanging up, I stared at my reflection in the dark computer screen. Patricia Mitchell, 52 years old, graying brown hair that I'd stopped coloring because I liked the way it made people underestimate me. Crow's feet that had nothing to do with laughter and everything to do with 2 years of rebuilding my life from scratch. David had always been good at planting seeds of doubt. During our marriage, he'd convinced me I was bad with money, terrible at directions, hopeless with technology. It had taken me months after the divorce to realize I could balance a checkbook perfectly well when someone wasn't constantly correcting my math. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Looking forward to Saturday's celebration. A friend. I stared at the message, feeling that familiar prickle at the base of my skull that had kept me alive through 23 years of marriage. To a man who collected grievances like some people collected stamps. No one I knew would text from an unknown number. No one I knew would call themselves a friend in that particular way, like they were sharing a private joke. I forwarded the message to my lawyer, Marcus Thompson, along with a note. David's up to something. Not sure what yet, but Saturday's going to be interesting. His response came back within minutes. Keep your phone recording. And Patricia, whatever he's planning, remember that you're not the same person who signed those divorce papers. He was right. The woman who'd signed those papers had believed her husband when he said she'd never survive on her own. She'd accepted his version of reality where she was helpless, dependent, and lucky to get any settlement at all. That woman was gone. The woman sitting in this office had built a consulting business that generated more monthly income than David made in 6 months as a middle manager at an insurance company. The woman running this company had developed software solutions for 3 Fortune 500 clients and was being courted by 2 major firms for acquisition talk. But David didn't know that. As far as he knew, I was still the pathetic ex-wife desperately trying to prove she could survive without him. And if that's what he believed, if that's what he was counting on for whatever he had planned for Saturday, then he was about to get the shock of his life. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my assistant. Cancel all weekend plans and call that private security consultant we used for the Morrison project. I think I'm going to need some insurance for Saturday's party. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, which seemed appropriate for a day I suspected would end badly for someone. I stood in my bedroom, debating between the navy dress that made me look competent or the black one that made me look like I was attending a funeral. Given what I was planning, the black one felt more honest. My phone rang at 9:30. Jennifer's name flashed on the screen, and I briefly considered letting it go to voicemail. But maternal instincts die hard, even when you suspect your daughter might be calling on behalf of the enemy. Hi, sweetheart. Everything ready for the party? Mom, I need to tell you something. Jennifer's voice had that tight quality it got when she was about to deliver bad news. Dad asked me to invite some additional people to the party. I paused in applying lipstick. Additional people? Some business associates of his. He said they wanted to meet you, that they might be able to help with your consulting work. Business associates. On a Saturday afternoon, at a child's birthday party, the pieces clicked together with almost audible precision. How thoughtful of him. Anyone I might know? I don't think so. He said they specialize in investigating business fraud. There it was. The confirmation I'd been expecting since that text message. David wasn't just planning to humiliate me. He was planning to do it with an audience of supposed experts who would validate his claims about my fake business. Jennifer, I said carefully, has your father ever actually seen any of my work? Has he looked at my client list, my revenue reports, anything concrete about my business? Silence stretched across the line. Finally, Mom, you know Dad worries about you. Ever since the divorce, he's been concerned that you might be making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. The patronizing tone was pure David. 23 years of marriage had taught me to recognize his words coming out of other people's mouths. Of course he is. Well, tell him I'm looking forward to meeting his business associate. And Jennifer, make sure you have that lawyer's number I gave you last month. You might need it sooner than you think. I hung up before she could ask what I meant. By 1:30, I was dressed, armed with a folder full of documents, and sitting in my car outside Jennifer's house. The modest suburban home looked exactly like what it was. Young family family trying to make ends meet on a teacher's salary and whatever Jennifer's husband brought in from his accounting firm. 3 cars I didn't recognize were parked on the street. 2 looked like rental cars, the kind visiting investigators might use. The third was a black SUV with tinted windows that screamed security consultant. I smiled. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who decided to bring backup. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. Jennifer appeared, looking harried and wearing the fixed smile she'd perfected as a kindergarten teacher. "Mom, you're here. Come in. Everyone's out back." The house buzzed with the controlled chaos of a 6-year-old's birthday party. Kids ran between rooms while parents clustered in small groups, trying to have adult conversations over the sound of what might have been either laughter or screaming. "Patricia!" David's voice carried across the living room like fingernails on a chalkboard. He approached with arms spread wide, as if we were old friends instead of ex-spouses who'd spent our last 3 conversations arguing about who got the good china. He looked older than I remembered, softer around the middle, grayer at the temples, with that slightly desperate energy of a man trying to convince himself his life had improved. "Hello, David. You look—" I paused, letting my eyes travel over his cheap polo shirt and ill-fitting khakis. "Comfortable?" His smile tightened just a fraction. "I'd like you to meet some people, business colleagues who've been eager to learn more about your consulting work." 3 people detached themselves from a corner of the room and moved toward us with the practiced coordination of a team. 2 men and a woman, all wearing that bland professional look that could mean anything from insurance sales to federal investigation. "Patricia Mitchell?" The older man extended his hand. "I'm Robert Chen, and these are my associates, Maria Santos and James Wright. We understand you run a digital consulting business?" I shook his hand, noting the way his eyes cataloged everything about my appearance. "I do, though I'm surprised anyone would want to discuss business at a children's party." "Well," David interjected, his voice carrying just a hint of smugness, "Bob here specializes in investigating online fraud. I thought it might be useful for you to get some professional advice about protecting yourself from scams." The setup was beautiful, I had to admit. Bring in supposed experts to expose my fake business in front of family and friends. Let them explain to everyone how I'd been deluded or taken advantage of. Position himself as the concerned ex-husband just trying to protect his naive former wife. "How thoughtful," I said. "Though I should mention, I brought some business documents with me, in case anyone wanted to review actual facts rather than speculation." Robert Chen's expression shifted slightly. "Documents?" I pulled out my folder and handed him a summary sheet. "Quarterly revenue reports, client testimonials, a few contracts for work I've completed. Feel free to take a look." As he scanned the page, I watched his face change. Maria Santos leaned over to read along, and I caught the moment when she registered the numbers. "These revenue figures," James Wright said carefully. "Are you saying this represents monthly income?" "No," I replied. "That's weekly revenue from my top 3 clients. Monthly numbers are in the next section." The silence stretched just long enough for David to realize something wasn't going according to plan. "Now," I said, smiling at the 3 investigators, "would you mind showing me your credentials? Because I'm very curious about what kind of investigation brought you here today." The moment I asked for credentials, I knew I'd hit the target. Robert Chen's confident expression flickered like a candle in the wind, while Maria Santos suddenly developed an urgent need to check her phone. "I'm sorry," David interjected, stepping closer with that territorial stance he'd perfected during our marriage. "Why would you need to see their credentials? They're here as my guests." "Of course they are." I kept my voice light, aware that Jennifer was hovering nearby, trying to look like she wasn't listening to every word. "I just find it interesting that your guests happen to be fraud investigators who want to discuss my business at a children's birthday party." James Wright cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mitchell, perhaps we could speak privately. There are some concerns about your business practices that merit discussion." "Concerns from whom, exactly?" The 3 exchanged glances that spoke volume. Whatever they'd been told about me, whatever case they'd been given, was clearly not matching the reality standing in front of them. "Mr. Mitchell contacted our firm," Maria Santos said carefully, "regarding potential fraudulent activity involving digital solutions consulting." "Your firm." I repeated the words slowly. "And what firm would that be?" Another pause, another exchange of glances. "Tri-State Investigations," Robert Chen said. I pulled out my phone and Googled them on the spot. Interesting. According to their website, Tri-State Investigations specializes in insurance fraud and workers' compensation claims. Not exactly the kind of business fraud David seems to think I'm involved in. David's face was turning an interesting shade of red. "Patricia, you're being paranoid. These people are here to help you." "Help me what? Realize that my successful business is actually a figment of my imagination? Understand that the $40,000 I made last month was just monopoly money?" I said the number loud enough for the nearby parents to hear. Several heads turned our way, including my daughter's. Jennifer's expression shifted from general anxiety to specific confusion. 40,000? payment? She whispered. Actually, it was $43,700, I corrected. But who's counting? David moved closer, lowering his voice to the threatening tone I remembered from our worst fights. You're making those numbers up, Patricia. Everyone knows consulting businesses like yours don't make real money. Everyone knows? Or everyone David knows? I looked around at the small audience we'd attracted, because I'm pretty sure everyone here is smart enough to understand the difference between assumptions and facts. That's when I saw them. Two more people had entered through the back door, moving with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested they weren't here for birthday cake. Unlike David's supposed investigators, these two had the bearing of actual law enforcement. Jennifer saw them too. Mom, who are those people? Friends of mine, I said. I believe they wanted to speak with David's investigators about a few things. The taller of the two new arrivals approached our group and displayed a badge that was definitely real. Detective Sarah Walsh, Chicago PD. Are you Robert Chen? Robert Chen went very still. I'm sorry. Who's asking? I am. We need to speak with you about a complaint filed regarding fraudulent impersonation of law enforcement officers. The color drained from Chen's face. I'm not sure what you mean. We mean, Detective Walsh continued, that someone matching your description along with two associates visited Mrs. Mitchell's home earlier this week, claiming to be police detectives investigating her business. Maria Santos took a step backward, bumping into James Wright, who was already reaching for his car keys. That's a felony, Detective Walsh added helpfully. Impersonating police officers, filing false reports. We're very interested in talking to whoever hired you to do it. David's mouth opened and closed, like a fish drowning in air. I don't know anything about police impersonation. I hired private investigators to look into Patricia's business practices. Private investigators, Detective Walsh repeated. Licensed private investigators? More silence. The kind that fills a room like smoke, making it hard to breathe. Because according to our records, Tri-State Investigations lost their license 6 months ago for unethical practices, and Mr. Chen here has 2 outstanding warrants for fraud charge. I watched David's world crumble in real time. The smug confidence melted into panic as he realized his plan to humiliate me had just backfired spectacularly. David, I said quietly, I think you might want to call a lawyer. Detective Walsh's partner stepped forward with handcuffs. Robert Chen, you're under arrest for impersonating a police officer, filing false reports, and violation of parole. As they read him his rights, I looked around at the shocked faces of the party guests. Jennifer stood frozen by the cake table, her mouth open in disbelief. The other parents had gathered their children closer, unsure whether they were witnessing a birthday party or an episode of Law and Order. Patricia, David said desperately, this is all a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From being successful? From proving you wrong about everything you said during the divorce? Maria Santos and James Wright were backing toward the door, but Detective Walsh's partner moved to block their exit. We're going to need to speak with you two as well. David lunged toward me, his face twisted with the kind of rage I'd seen too many times during our marriage. You set me up. You planned this. I didn't set you up, David. You set yourself up. I just didn't fall down the way you expected me to. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, David looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, Patricia. I smiled. Not the bitter smile from our divorce proceedings, but something genuine and warm. You're right, David. It's not over. It's just beginning. 20 minutes later, I stood in Jennifer's kitchen, helping her serve birthday cake to 6-year-olds, while 3 federal agents cataloged evidence in her living room. Just another typical Saturday in suburban Chicago. Mom, Jennifer said quietly, cutting precise slices of princess cake while keeping one eye on the chaos in the next room. What just happened out there? Your father hired fake investigators to expose my supposedly fake business. Unfortunately for him, they were actually criminals, and my business is very real. She set down the knife and stared at me. $43,000? Last month? Last month was particularly good. July was only $38,000. Mom, her voice cracked slightly. Why didn't you tell me? I loaded cake plates onto a tray, considering the question. Why hadn't I told her? Why had I let my own daughter think I was struggling, desperate, barely surviving on my settlement? Because I wanted to see who would support me when they thought I had nothing, I said finally. And who would only care once they realized I had something. Jennifer flinched, as if I'd slapped her. That's not fair, isn't it? When's the last time you asked how I was doing without prefacing it with concerns about my business phase or my online hobby? She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Outside, we could hear Emma laughing as she played with the children who hadn't been traumatized by watching their host's grandfather get arrested. Dad said you were throwing away the settlement money on some internet scam, and you believed him. He's my father, and I'm your mother. But you believed him without asking me a single direct question about my work. Detective Walsh appeared in the kitchen doorway. Mrs. Mitchell, could we speak with you for a moment? I followed her into Jennifer's home office, where her partner was reviewing documents on a laptop. Agent Morrison, FBI Financial Crimes, he introduced himself. We're very interested in how you knew to have us here today. I didn't know. I suspected. David's been questioning my business for 2 years, ever since the divorce. When fake police officers showed up at my house asking about fraud, it wasn't hard to connect the dots. The timing suggests you had advance warning of today's events. I pulled out my phone and showed them the mysterious text from a friend. This arrived Thursday. I forwarded it to my lawyer and hired security consultants for today's party. Agent Morrison made notes. Security consultants? The 2 men who filmed everything that happened out there. I wanted documentation in case David tried to claim I'd somehow entrapped him. Detective Walsh smiled. Smart thinking. Though you might be interested to know we've been investigating David Mitchell for several months. My turn to be surprised. For what? Insurance fraud. Turns out your ex-husband has been filing false claims for business equipment theft. He's also been using company resources to hire unlicensed investigators for personal vendettas. Personal vendettas. Against you specifically. Mrs. Mitchell, how much do you know about your ex-husband's financial situation? I considered the question. During the divorce, he claimed he was struggling, said he couldn't afford alimony because the business was barely profitable. Agent Morrison turned his laptop so I could see the screen. Bank statements, business records, credit card bills. David Mitchell's insurance company has been paying out significant claims for allegedly stolen business equipment. Equipment that was never actually stolen. He's been defrauding his own employer for about 3 years. We estimate he's stolen roughly $200,000 through false claims. He's also been using company money to hire people to harass his ex-wife. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. While David had been telling everyone I was a fraud, he'd been committing actual fraud. While he'd been claiming poverty during our divorce, he'd been stealing money from his employer. Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Walsh said, we're going to need you to document every instance of harassment, every contact from fake investigators, every attempt to discredit your business. For how long? Going back to your divorce proceeding. We believe Mr. Mitchell may have been committing fraud throughout your marriage, which could affect the settlement agreement. I thought about the modest house I'd accepted, the reduced alimony I'd agreed to, the way I'd let David convince me I deserved less because I'd never contributed financially to the marriage. How much less would I have accepted if I'd known he was stealing money the entire time? That's exactly what we're going to find out. 2 hours later, the party guests had gone home, the evidence had been collected, and Emma was finally eating her birthday cake in blissful ignorance of the adult drama that had unfolded around her celebration. Jennifer and I sat on her back porch, watching the sun break through the clouds for the first time all day. Mom, she said carefully, I owe you an apology. You owe me honesty. Have you really thought I was failing this whole time? She was quiet for a long moment. I thought you were trying to prove something to Dad. I thought maybe you were in denial about how hard it is to start over after a divorce. I was proving something, just not what you thought. What were you proving? I watched Emma chase Bubbles across the yard, her princess dress trailing behind her like a cape. That your father was wrong about me, that I wasn't helpless or dependent or incapable of surviving without him. And now? I thought about David sitting in a holding cell, about the FBI investigating his fraudulent claims, about the business I'd built from nothing while he'd been stealing from his employer. Now I'm not proving anything to anyone. I'm just living my life. Jennifer reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, Mom. I squeezed back. I'm proud of me, too. As we sat there in comfortable silence, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the fragile peace of hiding from conflict, but the solid peace of knowing exactly who I was and what I was capable of. David had hired investigators to expose my fake business. Instead, they'd exposed his fake life, and that was just the beginning of his problems. By Monday morning, my quiet consulting business had become the most interesting thing to happen in suburban Chicago since the mayor's scandal. The arrest footage from Emma's birthday party had somehow made it to local news, complete with dramatic headlines about fraud investigation gone wrong and birthday party bust. I was sitting in my home office, watching my phone ring non-stop while reporters camped outside my rental house like I was some kind of celebrity. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 2 years, I'd worked hard to keep my business low profile. Now everyone wanted to know about the woman whose ex-husband got arrested, trying to prove she was a fraud. Digital Solutions Consulting. Patricia speaking, I answered, knowing it was probably another journalist, but hoping for actual business. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Amanda Chen from the Chicago Tribune business section. I'd love to interview you about your consulting firm and the events at your granddaughter's party. My daughter's party, I corrected automatically. Emma is my granddaughter. Jennifer is my daughter. Of course, I apologize. Would you be available for an interview? Our readers are very interested in your success story. Success story. 2 days ago, most people thought I was a desperate divorcee playing at business. Now I was a success story because my criminal ex-husband had been stupid enough to get caught. I appreciate the interest, but I'm not really looking for publicity right now. Mrs. Mitchell, our research shows Digital Solutions Consulting has contracts with several major major corporations. You've built something impressive, and people should know about it. I paused, considering. Maybe it was time to stop hiding what I'd accomplished. Maybe David's spectacularly backfired plan had actually done me a favor by forcing my success into the open. What kind of article are we talking about? Business profile, how you built your company, what services you provide, your plans for growth. Nothing about the personal drama, strictly professional focus. 30 minutes later, I'd agreed to meet Amanda at a coffee shop downtown. As I hung up, my doorbell rang for the 15th time that morning. Through the peephole, I saw Jennifer standing on my porch, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Hi, sweetheart. Brave of you to run the media gauntlet." She stepped inside and immediately moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the news van parked across the street. "Mom, this is insane. Emma's kindergarten teacher called to make sure she was okay after seeing the arrest on TV. Emma's fine. She had a great birthday party, got lots of presents, and has no idea what happened after she went inside for cake. But what about Dad?" Jennifer's voice cracked slightly. "They're saying he could go to prison." I led her to the kitchen and started making coffee, needing something to do with my hands while we had this conversation. "That depends on how much money he stole and how many laws he broke. You don't seem very upset about it." I measured coffee grounds carefully, considering my response. "Jennifer, your father spent 2 years trying to convince everyone that I was a failure. He hired criminals to try to destroy my business. He defrauded his employer and used that money to harass me. Why exactly should I be upset that he's finally facing consequences? Because he's my father. Because this affects Emma and Tyler." The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the silence between us. Jennifer slumped into a kitchen chair, looking younger than her 31 years. "What are they saying about the insurance fraud?" she asked quietly. "Agent Morrison called this morning. They found evidence going back at least 5 years. False claims, inflated damage reports, equipment that was supposedly stolen but never actually existed. 5 years? But that means he was stealing money during the divorce proceedings. It means he was stealing money throughout our entire marriage, and he was particularly aggressive about it when he needed to hide assets during the divorce." Jennifer stared at her hands. "Mom, if Dad was making all that money illegally, then the settlement was based on fraudulent financial information." "Yes. What does that mean?" I poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from my daughter. "It means I accepted far less than I was entitled to because your father convinced everyone, including the judge, that he was barely scraping by." "How much less?" I thought about the modest settlement I'd accepted, the small alimony payments that had stopped after 18 months, the way I'd been grateful for whatever scraps David's lawyers had been willing to offer, probably about $400,000, maybe more, depending on how long the fraud was going on. Jennifer's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. $400,000? Your father is very good at appearing to be struggling while actually doing quite well for himself. It's a talent he perfected during our marriage. My phone rang, interrupting the moment. Agent Morrison's name flashed on the screen. "Mrs. Mitchell, we need to meet this afternoon. We've found something that changes the scope of our investigation." "Changes it how?" "Your ex-husband's fraud is more extensive than we initially thought, and it involves other people. People who might have been helping him." I glanced at Jennifer, who was watching my face with growing alarm. "Other people like who?" "Like his fiancée, Amber Richardson, like his business partner, Michael Torres, and possibly like his divorce attorney, Richard Steinberg." The room went very quiet. Jennifer's face had gone pale. "His divorce attorney? But that would mean that your entire divorce proceedings may have been based on fraudulent information provided by a conspiracy of people working to cheat you out of your rightful settlement." After Agent Morrison hung up, Jennifer and I sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, I could hear reporters talking to neighbors, trying to get quotes about the quiet woman who built $1 million business while her husband plotted against her. $1 million business. I wondered where they'd gotten that figure and whether it was accurate. "Mom," Jennifer said finally, "I need to tell you something." Her tone made me look up sharply. "What kind of something?" "During the divorce, Dad asked me to testify about your mental state. He said you were having trouble adjusting to being alone, that you might not be capable of making good financial decisions." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "And did you?" "I said you seemed sad but competent. I refused to say you were mentally unstable. But he asked you to lie in court. He said it wasn't lying. It was protecting you from making bad choices that would hurt your future." The coffee had gone cold in my hands. I set the cup down carefully, fighting the urge to throw it against the wall. "Jennifer, do you understand what you're telling me? Your father tried to use you to help steal my settlement money." Tears started rolling down her cheek. "I thought he was worried about you. I thought he was trying to help." "No, sweetheart. He was trying to steal from me, and he wanted you to help him do it." As Jennifer cried at my kitchen table, I felt the last piece of sympathy I'd had for David Mitchell crumble into dust. It was one thing to defraud me. It was another thing entirely to try to manipulate our daughter into helping him do it. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Chen. "Change of plans. Tribune wants this as a front-page business story. Interested?" I looked out out at the news vans, at my daughter crying over her father's betrayal, at the evidence of success I'd built while David had been stealing money to fund his campaign against me. Absolutely, I typed back. But I want to tell the whole story, not just the business success, everything. It was time for David's victims to know exactly what kind of man he really was. The Chicago Tribune article hit newsstands on Wednesday morning with a headline that made me choke on my coffee. From divorce court to corporate boardroom. How Patricia Mitchell built an empire while her ex-husband plotted her downfall. Empire seemed like an exaggeration, but the article was thorough. Amanda Chen had done her homework, interviewing my clients, reviewing my financial records, and creating a timeline that showed exactly how my business had grown while David had been committing fraud. The numbers were all there in black and white. First-year revenue, $87,000. Second-year revenue, $312,000. Projected third-year revenue, over $600,000. I'd built a legitimate empire while my ex-husband had been building a house of cards. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. First, my lawyer Marcus Thompson calling to congratulate me and warn me about the media attention. Then, 3 potential new clients who'd read the article and wanted to discuss projects. Then Jennifer, sobbing about how proud she was and how sorry she was for doubting me. By 8 a.m., I was sitting in Agent Morrison's office downtown, reviewing evidence that made David's birthday party arrest look like a parking ticket. Mrs. Mitchell, how familiar are you with your ex-husband's business partner, Michael Torres? I accepted the coffee Agent Morrison offered and settled into the uncomfortable chair across from his desk. The FBI field office had that sterile government building smell that reminded me of the courthouse during my divorce proceedings. I met him maybe 3 times during our marriage. David said he handled the technical side of their insurance adjusting business. Mr. Torres has been filing false claims in partnership with your ex-husband for at least 6 years. But that's not the interesting part. Agent Morrison opened a folder and spread photographs across his desk. Bank statements, email printouts, what looked like surveillance photos of David and Michael meeting in parking lots. The interesting part is that they've been using the stolen money to hire people to investigate and harass David's ex-wife. You. I leaned forward to study the document. Investigate me for what? Initially, they seemed to be looking for evidence that you were hiding assets during the divorce. When that didn't work, they started trying to find evidence that your business was fraudulent. So the fake police officers who came to my house were hired with money stolen from Consolidated Insurance Company. Yes, but Mrs. Mitchell, they weren't the first people David hired to investigate you. Agent Morrison pulled out another set of photos. Recognize any of these people? I studied the faces. One looked familiar, but I couldn't place her immediately. A woman in her 40s with blonde hair and professional clothes, standing outside my neighborhood grocery store. I think I've seen her around town, but I can't remember where. Her name is Rebecca Walsh. She's a private investigator who specializes in surveillance. David and Michael hired her 8 months ago to follow you, document your activities, and report on your business contact. The grocery store, the coffee shop near my office, the client meeting at the hotel downtown where I'd felt like someone was watching me. She's been following me for 8 months, taking photos, recording your movements, trying to identify your clients so David could contact them with claims that you were running some kind of scam. I felt sick. For 8 months, I'd been living my life while a stranger documented my every move, looking for ammunition David could use against me. Did she find anything? Agent Morrison smiled. She found evidence that you run a legitimate, highly successful business with satisfied clients and excellent financial management. Her reports actually prove you're everything David claimed you weren't. Where are those reports now? Evidence in a federal fraud case. Mrs. Mitchell, Rebecca Walsh has been cooperating with our investigation in exchange for reduced charges. She's provided us with detailed records of everything David asked her to do. He opened another folder, this one thick with printed emails and typed report. David requested surveillance on your personal relationships, hoping to find evidence of an affair that might affect alimony payments. He asked her to investigate your business clients to see if any contracts were fraudulent. He wanted her to document any evidence of mental instability or substance abuse. The violation felt overwhelming. David hadn't just tried to destroy my business, he'd tried to destroy every aspect of my privacy and dignity. What did she find? That you're a dedicated businesswoman who works long hours, maintains professional relationships with clients, exercises regularly, and lives a quiet, stable life. The most scandalous thing in her reports is that you occasionally have wine with dinner. Despite everything, I laughed. Shocking behavior for a 52-year-old woman. Mrs. Mitchell, there's something else, something that's going to be harder to hear. Agent Morrison's tone made me brace myself. David's fiancée, Amber Richardson, has also been cooperating with our investigation. She claims David told her he was monitoring you because he was concerned about your mental health and wanted to protect Jennifer's children from an unstable grandmother. Amber believes I'm mentally unstable? Believe, past tense. She's seen the surveillance reports now. She knows Suppose David lied to her about your condition, your business, and your relationship with your daughter. I thought about Amber Richardson, the 26-year-old dental hygienist who'd broken up my marriage. The woman who'd been planning to marry David while he used stolen money to stalk his ex-wife. How is she taking the news that her fiancé is a criminal? Not well. She's ended the engagement and moved out of his apartment. She's also provided us with recordings of conversations where David discussed his plans to prove you were incompetent to manage money. Agent Morrison handed me a transcript. David's voice, captured on Amber's phone during what had apparently been a romantic dinner. Once I prove Patricia's business is fake, I can petition the court to modify the settlement. If she's demonstrably incompetent with money, I might be able to get most of it back. She never deserved that much anyway. I read the transcript twice, feeling a familiar rage building in my chest. Even after our divorce was final, even after I'd rebuilt my life completely, David had been planning to take away what little I'd managed to keep. There are 17 recordings like this, Agent Morrison said quietly. Amber thought she was helping him protect his family. She didn't realize she was documenting conspiracy to commit fraud. As I left the FBI building 2 hours later, I had copies of surveillance reports that proved my competence, recordings that proved David's malice, and financial documents that showed the extent of his theft. I also had a court date. The FBI's evidence had convinced a federal judge to freeze all of David's assets pending trial, but more importantly, it had convinced a family court judge to review our divorce settlement for fraud. Marcus Thompson called as I was driving home. Patricia, I've been reviewing the FBI evidence. If we can prove the divorce proceedings were corrupted by David's fraudulent financial disclosures, we might be able to void the entire settlement agreement. What would that mean? It would mean you'd be entitled to half of everything David actually owned, including money he stole and hid from the court. I pulled into my driveway, where the news vans were still parked, but the reporters had mostly given up trying to get me to comment. How much money are we talking about? Based on the FBI's financial analysis, approximately $1.2 million, plus damages for the surveillance, the harassment, and the attempted destruction of your business. I sat in my car, staring at my modest rental house while trying to process what Marcus had just told me. David had stolen over $1 million, money that should have been split between us during the divorce, money I'd never known existed because he'd convinced everyone, including me, that we were barely getting by. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Mom, I saw the Tribune article. I'm so proud of you. And I'm so sorry I didn't believe in you sooner. I typed back, come over for dinner tonight. Bring Emma and Tyler. We need to talk about Grandpa David, and I want them to hear the truth from someone who loves them. It was time to stop protecting David from the consequences of his choices. It was time to start protecting my grandchildren from his lies. The phone call that changed everything came on a Friday morning while I was reviewing proposals for what would have been my biggest contract yet. Microsoft wanted Digital Solutions Consulting to manage their small business outreach program across the Midwest. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Detective Sarah Walsh. We met at your daughter's house last weekend. I set aside the Microsoft contract, noting the irony that I was about to become too busy for new business, just as business was getting really good. Detective Walsh, how can I help you? We need you to come in for an interview. There's been a development in your ex-husband's case. What kind of development? The kind that involves additional charges and more victims. Mrs. Mitchell, David's fraud is bigger than we initially thought. Much bigger. 2 hours later, I was sitting in an interview room that smelled like industrial coffee and broken dreams, listening to Detective Walsh explain how my ex-husband had managed to steal over $2 million from multiple insurance companies while simultaneously destroying the lives of several other women. Patricia, may I call you Patricia? Your ex-husband has been running this scheme for almost 8 years. He identifies women going through divorces, typically women with assets or successful businesses, and he systematically works to destroy their credibility. She spread files across the table, photos of women who looked eerily similar to me, professional women in their 40s and 50s, all recently divorced, all looking slightly shell-shocked. Meet Linda Torres, Marjorie Chen, and Susan Wright, all divorced from business partners of your ex-husband, all investigated by the same fake police officers who visited you. All had their businesses attacked by the same fraudulent private investigators. I studied the photo, feeling sick. He's done this to other people? Linda Torres lost her accounting practice because clients believed she was under investigation for embezzlement. Marjorie Chen had to shut down her catering business after rumors spread that she was operating without proper improper licenses. Susan Wright filed for bankruptcy after her consulting firm's reputation was destroyed by allegations of fraud. And David profited from this. How? Detective Walsh opened another file. In each case, the women's ex-husbands used the manufactured scandals to petition for modified divorce settlements. They claimed their ex-wives were mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, or criminally involved. In most cases, the women ended up returning significant portions of their settlements. The room felt too small, too hot. How much money? Linda Torres returned $400,000. Marjorie Chen returned $250,000. Susan Wright lost her house, her business, and her retirement savings. She's currently living with her daughter and working as a grocery store cashier. I thought about Susan Wright, a successful businesswoman reduced to bagging groceries because my ex-husband had orchestrated her destruction. Why didn't they fight back? Because they were isolated, exhausted, and facing what appeared to be legitimate law enforcement investigations. By the time they realized what was happening, their reputations were destroyed and their money was gone. Detective Walsh leaned forward. Patricia, you're the first woman who didn't break. You're the first one who fought back effectively enough to expose the whole scheme. I'm the first one who got lucky enough to have real investigators show up before the fake ones could finish their job. No, you're the first one who was smart enough to document everything, savvy enough to hire your own investigators, and strong enough to call their bluff in front of witnesses. She handed me another file. These are the recordings your security consultants made at the birthday party. But Patricia, they also recorded something else. A transcript of a phone conversation between David and Michael Torres, captured by surveillance equipment while they waited for the party to start. David, she's going to be humiliated in front of everyone. After today, no one will believe her business is real. Michael, what if the investigators can't prove anything? David, they don't have to prove anything. They just have to make her look crazy for claiming she makes $40,000 a month consulting. Everyone knows women like Patricia don't build real businesses. Michael, and then? David, then I petition to have the settlement modified based on her demonstrated financial incompetence, just like we did with Linda and Marjorie. Women like Patricia, I repeated. Women like me don't build real businesses. David and his partners have been stealing from successful divorced women for 8 years, Detective Walsh said, using their ex-husband's insider knowledge to target them, destroy them, and steal from them. How many women? 7 that we know of, probably more that haven't come forward yet. I thought about Linda Torres, Marjorie Chen, Susan Wright, and 4 other women whose lives had been destroyed so David could steal their money. What happens now? Now you testify, not just about what David did to you, but about the pattern of behavior that victimized multiple women. Patricia, your case is the key to prosecuting a conspiracy that's destroyed dozens of lives. Detective Walsh gathered the file. There's something else. The FBI has been investigating insurance fraud in this region for 2 years. Your ex-husband's arrest opened up a much bigger case involving organized fraud across multiple companies. How much bigger? The initial estimate was $2 million stolen from insurance companies. The current estimate is over $15 million, involving 12 different conspirators across 4 states. $15 million. David hadn't just been stealing from me. He'd been running a criminal enterprise that destroyed women's lives for profit. As I left the police station, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For 2 years, I'd wondered if I was being paranoid about David's behavior, if I was imagining the surveillance, the harassment, the systematic attacks on my credibility. Now I knew I hadn't been paranoid enough. My phone rang as I reached my car. Jennifer's number. Mom, I just got off the phone with Tyler's school counselor. Someone called them claiming to be investigating you for child endangerment. They wanted to know if Tyler had mentioned anything about Grandma Patricia acting strangely. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar rage build. Even now, even while sitting in jail, David was still trying to destroy me. What did the school tell them? That they'd never received any reports of problems, and that Tyler talks about you constantly with obvious affection. But Mom, whoever called, knew details about our family. They knew Tyler's full name, his teacher's name, his class schedule. Jennifer, I need you to bring the kids to my house tonight. All of you. Pack bags for the weekend. Why? Because David's criminal partners are still free, and they have detailed surveillance information about our entire family. Until the FBI arrests all of them, none of us are safe. As I drove home, I realized the birthday party arrest had just been the opening move. David and his partners had spent 8 years perfecting the art of destroying women like me, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I would break the way the others had broken. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The revelation that changed everything came not from the FBI, not from Detective Walsh, Walsh, not from any official investigation. It came from a cardboard box in my garage that I'd been avoiding for 2 years. Jennifer had brought it over after cleaning out David's home office following his arrest. "Mom, there might be important financial documents in here. The FBI said you should review everything before Dad's assets get permanently frozen." I'd planned to go through it systematically, but life had been chaotic with reporters, legal proceedings, and the constant stream of new clients who'd read about my business in the Tribune. The box had sat unopened for 3 days. Friday evening, after Jennifer and the kids had gone home, I finally opened it. Most of the contents were what I'd expected: old tax returns, insurance policies, business correspondence. But at the bottom, wrapped in a manila envelope and marked personal private, was something that made my blood run cold. A journal. David's journal, dating back 12 years. The early entries were mundane complaints about work, money, our marriage. But as I read deeper, a pattern emerged that made me understand exactly how long David had been planning my destruction. March 15th, 11 years ago. Patricia thinks she's so smart with her part-time bookkeeping job. Acts like helping Mrs. Chen with her taxes, makes her some kind of financial expert. She has no idea how real business works. June 8th, 10 years ago. Patricia mentioned taking some computer classes. She thinks she can learn consulting from community college courses. It's almost cute how naive she is. September 22nd, 9 years ago. Met with Richard Steinberg today about asset protection strategies. He says the key is establishing a pattern of financial irresponsibility before filing for divorce. Patricia's little computer hobby could actually be useful. Let her think she's building a business, then use her inevitable failure as evidence of poor judgment. I had to stop reading. The journal was shaking in my hands. David had been planning our divorce and my financial destruction for 9 years. He'd encouraged my business education, my computer training, my early consulting work, not because he supported me, but because he was documenting my inevitable failure to use against me later. August 14th, 8 years ago. Patricia landed her first real client today. Small contract, maybe $500, but she's acting like she invented the internet. This could work perfectly. Let her build up some modest success, then document how she gets overwhelmed and starts making mistakes. Richard says judges are very sympathetic to husbands whose wives have unrealistic business ambitions. November 3rd, 7 years ago. Patricia made $8,000 this quarter, more than I expected, but still clearly unsustainable. She's working 16-hour days and neglecting household responsibilities. This exhaustion pattern will be perfect evidence of inability to balance business and personal life. The entries continued, year after year, documenting David's careful observation of my growing success and his increasingly detailed plans to destroy it. April 17th, 6 years ago. Patricia's quarterly revenue hit $15,000. Need to accelerate timeline. Met with Michael Torres about the insurance opportunities he mentioned. If we can generate enough extra income, I can file for divorce while appearing financially strapped. October 9th, 5 years ago. Patricia made $47,000 this year. This is getting out of hand. Spoke with Richard about hiring investigators to document her business irregularities. She must be cutting corners somehow. No woman builds a real consulting practice that quickly. And then, the entry that explained everything. December 12th, 4 years ago. Patricia made $78,000 this year and thinks I don't know. I've been intercepting her business mail and monitoring her computer. She's successful enough to be a real problem in divorce proceedings. Time to implement Richard's full strategy. Document mental instability, financial irresponsibility, and business fraud. The insurance income will fund investigators to prove she's not as smart as she thinks she is. He'd known. For years, David had known exactly how successful my business was. He'd been monitoring my emails, intercepting my mail, tracking my income, and he'd been using stolen money to hire people to destroy the very success he'd been secretly documenting. The final entries were the most devastating. March 8th, 2 years ago, 1 month before he filed for divorce. Patricia thinks she's hidden her business income, but I have records of everything. The plan is perfect. Let her accept a modest settlement based on my financial struggles, then use the evidence of her hidden income to petition for modification after the divorce is final. She'll lose everything and never understand how I knew about money she thought was secret. But the last entry was dated just 6 months ago. January 15th, this year. Patricia's business made $300,000 last year. The surveillance confirms she has major corporate client. Time for the final phase. Destroy her credibility completely so she loses everything and comes crawling back. No woman should be more successful than her ex-husband. I sat in my garage, surrounded by the detritus of my former life, holding evidence that my entire marriage had been a lie. For 12 years, David had been planning to destroy me. He'd encouraged my education and my business development specifically so he could document my inevitable failure. Except I hadn't failed. I'd succeeded beyond his ability ability to explain away or discredit. So he'd escalated from planning to use my failure against me to actively trying to create that failure through criminal harassment. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Thompson. "Patricia, call me immediately. The FBI wants to meet first thing Monday. They found something that changes everything about your case." I looked at the journal in my hands, understanding exactly what they'd found. Someone else had discovered David's detailed plans, probably through a search warrant on his computer or office, but I had the original handwritten evidence. 12 years of premeditated conspiracy to defraud me, documented in David's own words, with dates and details that would make it impossible for him to claim his actions were spontaneous or defensive. I took photos of every page, uploaded them to a secure server, and emailed copies to Marcus, Agent Morrison, and Detective Wall. Then I called Jennifer. "Sweetheart, I need you to come over right away. Bring Mark if you can. There's something you need to see about your father." "Mom, it's 10 o'clock at night. Can't this wait until tomorrow?" "Jennifer, I just found proof that your father has been planning to destroy my life since before you graduated high school. No, this cannot wait until tomorrow." 2 hours later, Jennifer sat in my living room, reading entries from her father's journal, while her husband Mark paced behind the couch like a caged animal. "He planned this for 12 years? Her voice was barely a whisper. "He encouraged my education so he could document my failure. He supported my business development so he could prove I was irresponsible. He monitored my success so he could steal it more effectively." Mark stopped pacing. "Jennifer, your father is a sociopath. This level of long-term manipulation and planning. Normal people don't do this." Jennifer looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Mom, how did you survive being married to someone who was documenting your every move for 12 years? I thought about all the times David had seemed supportive of my education, encouraging about my business development, interested in my client work. All of it had been intelligence gathering for his long-term plan to destroy me. I survived because I didn't know. If I'd known he was planning my destruction for 12 years, I probably would have given up before I started. What happens now? I looked at the journal, at the evidence of 12 years of premeditated conspiracy, at the detailed plans to destroy not just my business, but my relationship with my children and grandchildren. Now your father learns that some women are stronger than he calculated, and some plans backfire more spectacularly than others. The war David had been planning for 12 years was about to begin, but he'd made one crucial miscalculation in all his careful planning. He'd assumed the woman he was married to was the same woman he'd be fighting in court. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago was buzzing with reporters when I arrived for David's sentencing hearing. 6 months had passed since Emma's birthday party, and the case had grown into something none of us had anticipated. David Michael Mitchell, along with 11 co-conspirators, had been convicted of running a multi-state conspiracy that defrauded insurance companies of over $18 million, while simultaneously destroying the lives of 17 divorced women. I walked through the crowd of journalists with my head high, wearing the navy blue suit I'd bought specifically for this day. Next to me, Marcus Thompson carried 2 briefcases full of evidence that had helped convict not just David, but an entire network of criminals who'd made a business of victimizing divorced women. "Mrs. Mitchell," a reporter shoved a microphone toward my face. "How do you feel knowing your ex-husband could face 20 years in federal prison?" I paused at the courthouse steps, looking directly into the camera. "I feel like justice is about to be served, not just for me, but for 17 other women whose lives were destroyed by these criminals." Inside the courthouse, I took my seat in the gallery. Jennifer sat beside me, along with Mark and the children. Behind us were Linda Torres, Marjorie Chen, and Susan Wright, 3 of the other women whose lives David had helped destroy. David entered in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled, looking older and smaller than I remembered. 6 months in federal detention had not been kind to him. The arrogant man who'd tried to humiliate me at a children's birthday party was gone, replaced by someone who looked broken and defeated. Judge Patricia Hendricks called the court to order. "Mr. Mitchell, you have been convicted on 14 federal charges, including wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything to say?" David stood slowly, his lawyer steadying his elbow. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Your Honor, I want to apologize to my ex-wife and to the other victims of my actions. I let greed and anger cloud my judgment, and I caused tremendous harm to people who didn't deserve it." I almost laughed. Even now, even facing decades in prison, David couldn't bring himself to take full responsibility. "I let greed and anger cloud my judgment," as if his 12-year plan to destroy me had been a momentary lapse in judgment. Judge Hendricks wasn't buying it either. "Mr. Mitchell, I've reviewed the evidence in this case extensively. The journal entries, the surveillance records, the systematic targeting of vulnerable women. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. This was a calculated criminal enterprise that you ran for almost a decade." She shuffled through papers hours on her bench. The prosecution has recommended 25 years. The defense has asked for leniency based on your cooperation with the investigation. I've considered both arguments. The courtroom fell silent. David Michael Mitchell, I sentence you to 18 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, including Mrs. Patricia Mitchell, who will receive $2.3 million in compensatory damages, plus an additional $1.7 million in punitive damages, $4 million. I sat very still, trying to process the number. Furthermore, Mr. Mitchell, I am ordering that all property and assets acquired during your marriage be subject to forensic accounting to determine what was purchased with stolen funds. Any such property will be forfeited and the proceeds distributed to victims. Judge Hendricks looked directly at David. Mr. Mitchell, you spent 12 years planning to destroy an innocent woman's life out of nothing more than petty jealousy and greed. You weaponized the legal system against multiple victims, you corrupted law enforcement processes, and you caused immeasurable emotional and financial harm to 17 families. David swayed slightly, gripping the defense table. Society needs to be protected from people like you for a very long time. As the bailiffs led David away, he turned to look at me one last time. I met his gaze steadily, feeling none of the satisfaction I'd expected, just a profound sadness for the life he'd wasted on hatred and greed. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded our group again. Mrs. Mitchell, what will you do with the $4 million in damages? I thought about the question. $4 million was more money than I'd ever imagined having. It was also money that came at the cost of 12 years of living with a man who'd been documenting my every move, planning my destruction, and secretly stealing from insurance companies to fund his obsession with controlling me. I'm going to use part of it to start a foundation that helps divorced women rebuild their lives after financial abuse, I said. The Mitchell Foundation for Women's Financial Independence. Are you naming it after yourself? I smiled. No, I'm naming it after my ex-husband. David Mitchell's crimes created the need for this foundation. It seems appropriate that his name should be on the solution. Later that evening, I sat in my home office, the same office where I'd built digital solutions consulting from nothing, while David had been planning my destruction. The Microsoft contract was framed on my wall now, along with articles about my business success and letters from the women who'd benefited from the support group I'd started for victims of financial fraud. Jennifer knocked on my doorframe. Mom, how are you feeling? I looked around at the life I'd built, despite everything David had tried to do to stop me. The successful business, the strong relationships with my children and grandchildren, the financial security I'd created through my own work. I feel free, I said. For the first time in 23 years, I feel completely free. My phone buzzed with a notification, an email from a woman named Carol Peterson in Portland, Oregon. The subject line read, I saw your story in the news. I think my ex-husband might be doing the same thing to me. I opened the email and began reading about another woman whose ex-husband had been questioning her business success, hiring investigators to look into her finances, and spreading rumors about her mental stability. I picked up my phone and called the number Carol had included in her email. Carol, this is Patricia Mitchell. I got your email, and I think we need to talk, because David was in prison. But there were other men like David out there, other women like me who needed to know they weren't crazy. They weren't imagining the surveillance and the harassment, and they weren't alone. The war David had started was over. He'd lost everything, his freedom, his money, his reputation, his relationship with his children. But the work of helping other women win their wars was just beginning, and I had 4 million reasons to make sure no woman ever had to face what I'd faced alone again. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.